Now, we give you pagan news. With Chris Copeland, Don Lewis, Lone Wolf and Mary Hawk. News headlines for the pagan community and to the world. I give you pagan news.
Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Don Lewis. With me is Reverend Mary Hawk. Normally, we would be joined by our cohorts, Chris Copeland, coming to us from the Netherlands, but she is on vacation this month. And normally, we would be joined by Harold Sanford Carter, who is in New Mexico, but there seem to be some technical difficulties. But we do have reports from both of them. And we want to thank you for joining us. And we have what I think are some interesting stories for you this month. Some of them are quite at the moment. And I want to start with the recent controversy at the Paris Olympics. And if you've not been following the uproar, there has been a huge outcry about the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics mocking the Christian faith with a parody of the Last Supper. And people up to and including the Speaker of the House of Representatives and members of certain political dynasties have had things to say about this. And it's very interesting to look at it. Here is a photo from the actual scene that caused the problem. And the complaint is that this is somehow a parody of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. But you know, your opinion may differ from mine, but I don't see any similarity whatsoever except from the presence of a table. It's news to me that the Last Supper has a large blue man on a plate of fruit reclining in the middle of the table. I don't really see much of any resemblance here. And it's worth noting that the artistic director who put this on has publicly said that there was no such intention, and that in fact a different classic painting was being referenced, and that painting is called The Feast of the Gods by Jan Hermans van Bielaert from 1635, which is in a museum in Dijon, France. And that the point of it was to reference the Greek origin of the Olympic Games with a reference to Greek mythology. And yet people all over the United States are terribly upset about this mockery of the Christian faith. And there are a few things I think that behoove us to consider about this, including the fact that at best there is a vague resemblance to Da Vinci's Last Supper, and like I say, I don't personally even see that. It's not very close at all. The people who put it on have said, no, this is not what we were doing. Although apparently the French Olympics have apologized for any offense, but that does not come down to the same thing as saying that's what this was intended to be. There are a number of other things that Christians have objected to regarding this performance, including the depiction of the goddess Sequana, the goddess of the Seine River, who is shown on her horse, which is a historical way of portraying her. But they're attempting to say that this was a reference to Revelations. And in my opinion, this is very relevant to us for several reasons. One of them is the tactic that's being used. And we're going to be talking about the idea of Project 2025 in a few minutes. And these things directly correlate, because this kind of manufactured outrage has been a major tactic for many years now. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room, who says it's all about origin stories. What he means by that, and I was about to get to this, one of the reasons that this is happening has to do with education. Um, there is a reason that when we look at Project 2025, limiting public education is one of its major goals. And if you look at the Christian nationalist community, they have limited the education of their young people for a couple of generations now. Anyone with any background in art history or European history or mythology would never have reached these conclusions. But these people don't have that background. They only know a very narrow set of symbolism, and they assume everyone else is using that same symbolism. And it's kind of important to notice that. The idea that this could have been a different classic painting would not have occurred to them because they're not familiar with any other classic paintings. The idea that it's referencing the Greek gods probably would not have occurred to them because they're not familiar with the Greek gods, even in a historical sense. And if you look at some of the comments being made, they're not even familiar with the origin of the Olympics within Greek pagan religion and why one would be referencing the Greek gods in connection to them. Though how you could miss it is utterly beyond me when every Olympic ceremony begins with lighting the Olympic torch with all kinds of pagan references, and has since the beginning of the modern Olympics. And I see that Harold is now here, and we're going to try to bring him on. But, you know, this, on one hand, this seems like a minor thing. It's also a major thing. It is an example of creating a fight where there is none, of putting people in a defensive position when there is no need for it, and of taking a relatively peaceful situation and making it into a fight. And these are all techniques. They are techniques of advancing certain religious agendas, which again, we're about to talk about. But in talking about how people have reacted to this, I think we have to bear in mind the circumstances around it. Now, there's another very important circumstance around this also that I feel must be pointed out, and that is that only a short time before this big protest, there was a major attack on the French rail system that shut down the rail system in much of the country through what has been called malicious arson. When I first reported on this on my midday program on Friday, only one person had been arrested, who apparently had ties to Russia. I understand now that Interpol has arrested at least 250 people in several countries in connection with this attack, about half of whom are connected to Russia, and many of whom are connected to the conservative political party that just lost the French election. This is important to remember when we hear certain politicians, for example, in other countries, such as the US, use phrases like, it'll be a bloodless revolution if it's allowed to be, that violence is a real possibility here. That we are possibly watching an attempt at a violent reaction in France by a losing political party. And we need to pay some attention to that it isn't just rhetoric. And in my mind, as we look at this, this brouhaha over the opening ceremony, I don't know that it's unrelated, because these are basically the same movement, Christian nationalism, on both sides of these things. I think there is, and probably will continue to be, a concerted effort to create continuing issues here, and I think we should be paying attention to it. And welcome, Harold. And we are now
Hello, Dawn. Hello, Mary. How are you?
We are
Harold,
good.
welcome.
And how are you?
Oh, I'm well. I'm texturing a ceiling, throwing some mud, doing some paint. So excuse my appearance.
And you are currently in New Mexico, I believe, with Patrick McCollum.
Yes, that is correct.
And that is wonderful. So to wrap up this story about the Olympics, to me, this is just another installment on our ongoing coverage of the Christian nationalist movement and their attempt to continue efforts of manufactured outrage. One of the things that I would call your attention to, I already mentioned the way in which they restrict education for their followers. But the other is for at least 2 generations now, they've been feeding them constant manufactured outrage. And there have been studies done which have indicated that if you expose a person to, well, I think it was 2 months of constant negative messaging, you will move them to a state of constant panic. And if you look at these people, that's kind of where they're at and kind of what is being done to them. And I'd love to be angry with silly responses, because this whole thing is silly. No educated person could have mistaken this for a parody on the Last Supper. But I can't really be angry about it because these people have been so manipulated. They don't know what they're doing. And I think that we need to be very mindful of that, because there are a lot of them, and they really don't know what they're doing. They're simply doing what they're programmed to do, and presumably will continue to. And for ourselves, we really need to work on how we respond to this, and in particular, on continuing to make better educational options available to combat that limited education that they are trying to promote. And to continue in general to promote wider messages in society so that we don't see this kind of nonsense so often. Now, the other thing I do want to mention before moving on from this, apparently there was a French explanation of all of this as the ceremony was unfolding, which the English language channels covering it, I believe NBC, chose not to translate, which undoubtedly added to the problem. Had that narration been translated, the whole thing might have been avoided, but it also might not have been, because it seems like these people are looking for occasions to be outraged, and in fact, I believe they are. And we need, again, to be mindful of that and not to be caught in it ourselves, but to understand what we're watching and to do our best to counteract it in the ways that are available to us. And we shall see what happens as the Olympics go forward. We'll see what comes of those 250 arrests that have been made in Europe. We'll see if there is, in fact, another attack. My understanding is that French authorities and European authorities in general are expecting a major attack on the Olympics, which I will not be surprised if we see. And with that, we're ready for our next story. And Harold, I will hand the chair over to you.
And as a producer, I'll apologize. They have updated the system, and yeah, it pops up on screen without pushing the go button anymore. So Harold, do you want to introduce the segment before I hit play?
Yeah, sure. What we have here is a pagan news segment in series of incarcerated pagans and what pagan leaders work with the incarcerated. And this is series 3. There will be another series 4. I had bumped into an organization that I've never heard of, that I've only heard pieces of. And it's very important that the pagan community is aware of this particular organization called Hematite Inmate Ministries.
Providing for Pagans in Prisons, Part 3 in the Incarcerated Pagan series.
In a groundbreaking initiative, Hematite Inmate Ministries has emerged as a beacon of hope for incarcerated pagans. Founded on the belief that everyone deserves spiritual support, this collaborative effort brings together volunteers and those aspire to serve within prison walls. Their mission and purpose, Hematite Inmate Ministries, aim to foster mutual support and education among pagans behind bars. Their mission extends beyond conventional religious practices, recognizing the unique needs and challenges faced by incarcerated individuals. Ritual ideas, resources, and lessons are tailored specifically for this context, diverging significantly from those available to the unincarcerated population. Inclusivity and legacy. The ministry welcomes pagans of all persuasions, including those who have previously served time. It is inclusive. Approach ensures that no one is left without spiritual guidance during their incarceration. Notably, Hematite Inmate Ministry stands as a testament to the legacy of M. Maka Nightmare, whose vision continues to impact lives within prison walls. As the stone hematite symbolizes justice, this ministry seeks to bring fairness, compassion, and understanding to those often overlooked by mainstream religious institutions. Whether through rituals, shared resources, or a sense of community, Hematite Inmate Ministry strives to provide solace and connection in an otherwise challenging environment. Supporting Hematite Inmate Ministry is commendable. Here are some ways that you can contribute. You can volunteer. Consider volunteering your time and skills, whether it's facilitating workshops, providing counseling, or organizing events. Your involvement can make a difference. Donations. Financial contributions help sustain the ministry. You can donate directly to Hematite Inmate Ministries or explore fundraising campaigns they may have. Resource sharing. If you have relevant books, materials, or resources, consider donating them to the ministry. These resources can enhance the spiritual well-being of incarcerated pagans. Spread awareness. Share information about Hematite Inmate Ministries with your social circles. Awareness leads to more support and engagement. Advocacy. Advocate for better recognition of pagan practices within prison systems. Encourage dialogue and understanding among prison staff and administrators. Remember that even small actions can have a significant impact. Thank you for caring about the cause. Hematite Inmate Ministries. As we conclude part 3 of the Incarcerated. Well, that's half of it. There's still more to that segment. That was kind of a halftime feel.
Okay, I can bring it back.
Is there any way you can bring that back? Great. Right where the
certainly
halftime feel
can.
is, please. Directly to Hematite Inmate Ministries or explore fundraising campaigns they may have. Resource sharing. If you have relevant books, materials, or resources, consider donating them to the ministry. These resources can enhance the spiritual well-being of incarcerated pagans. Spread awareness. Share information about Hematite Inmate Ministries with your social circles. Awareness leads to more support and engagement. Advocacy. Advocate for better recognition of pagan practices within prison systems. Encourage dialogue and understanding among prison staff and administrators. Remember that even small actions can have a significant impact. Thank you for caring about the cause. Hematite Inmate Ministries. As we conclude part 3 of the Incarcerated Pagan series, we find ourselves at a pivotal juncture. Part 4 will delve into the heart of the matter, identifying the passionate activists and dedicated team members who drive this transformative initiative.
The activists within, who are the tireless advocates behind Hematite Inmate Ministries. What motivates them to champion the rights and spiritual well-being of incarcerated pagans? We'll explore their stories, shedding light on the faces that remain hidden within our prison walls. Unveiling the team in the next installment, we'll lift the veil on the ministries team, from volunteers to chaplains. Each individual plays a crucial role in shaping the lives of those they serve. Their commitment transcends more duty. It's a calling to create a more compassionate and inclusive environment. Further research ahead. Our journey doesn't end here. We embark on a quest for knowledge, seeking to understand the intricate web of connections that sustain Hematite Inmate Ministries. Stay tuned as we uncover the names, faces, and stories that weave this remarkable tapestry. And with that, dear viewers, we conclude today's broadcast. This is Harold the Lone Wolf Carter, your faithful guide through the currents of pagan news and events. Remember to stay informed, stay curious, and above all, stay true to your quest of knowledge. Until next time, signing off.
And Harold, we have a question in the chat about pagan prison ministry. Do you want to address it, or would you like me to?
Either or, we both can.
Okay, and Sandra Yeager asked, would prisons let volunteers in with ritual tools like anathema, for example?
I can answer first. Most of prisons in the United States, and I'm sure probably on a global, are not going to let you have steel because it becomes a security risk. Now, some institutions will allow a cardboard athamate, for an example, and the most clever I've seen is a cardboard athamate with a sewing needle at the tip, so you still have that steel that is important for moving spiritual, whatever you would like to call it.
Okay, and I am a volunteer prison minister, and we use feathers since the athame is associated with East. So we just bring a feather in because we're not going to be able to bring a knife in. I'm in the state of Tennessee, and I also would not be able to bring a needle in. I might be able to bring in a cardboard representation, but I'm not going to be able to bring in a knife of any sort. But I appreciate the question. I can bring in a wooden wand. I can bring in a chalice. I can bring in a cauldron, and I bring in a stone to represent earth. All right, and now I am going to talk a little bit about Project 2025. And we've been hearing an awful lot about this project in the United States, what it is, what it isn't. And it's basically a platform for Christian dominism. It has been written by the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank founded in 1973. It is a 501c3 organization, and I'm going to pause, and Reverend Don can back me up on this. A 501c3 actually can comment on political issues.
Yes.
They cannot back a specific candidate, but it is founded to promote conservative ideas. So they can put out a platform for conservative ideas. They have focused on pushing a very conservative agenda starting during the Nixon presidency through the current day. Their current social agenda includes pushing the so-called Christian family values, such as traditional marriage, one between a man and a woman, with the idea that only the man works and the woman stays home and has lots of babies, rolling back protections for LGBTQ plus individuals, rolling back access to abortion, and even to contraception. Okay. And I want to point out that while what they have released recently for Project 2025, they're focused on an agenda for a conservative president. They seem to assume that the Republican candidate is going to win in 2025, but this agenda can be implemented by a conservative Congress and conservative Supreme Court justices. This platform is not going to go away at the end of this election cycle. The people who created it are going to continue to push their agenda to force everyone to live according to their narrow views, no matter what the outcome of the current election is. Project 2025 is supported by a coalition of 100 conservative business partners. And now, let's see here. And here are some links for you. You can go to the heritage.org. You can look at the full text of the Project 2025 document. They keep moving it around. So I downloaded it. It's at pagan.world. I put it up on my blog here. It's at the top. You can download it. It's a large PDF. So I don't know if you want to try it on your phone or not. No, I didn't share that, but it's there. And you can go to the Heritage organization and see this coalition where they've got all their partners listed. And I highly recommend everyone doing so. Now remember, this is not going to go away in November, no matter what happens.
I think that is probably the single most important point, that this issue around Project 2025 is not about any one election. It's a long-term movement that's been in process now for decades. It's not about any one office being won or lost. The fact that what's happened to the court system is a bigger victory than anything they're likely to win in any election. And we need to be mindful of that. We need to realize what's happening and not be conned into the idea that it's about a single office or a single person. It's a lot of people who have put their lives into doing this. And I would say that we're basically in the same place that the Near East was in 40 years ago. We have a dangerously radicalized and growing minority who we are not doing a good job of stopping. And in the chat room, I see that Joanne says, it sounds like the 1950s. And, you know, I actually think their goal is closer to the 1850s. And I think that I think we need to be very mindful of where this could go. And if we ignore it, we can't really complain about where it ends up. I believe Harold has something he would like to say.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on Project 2025. One of the things that I've seen is that if Project 2025 comes to full force, to full power, what's going to end up happening is a lot of platforms like Corellian TV, Divination TV, Pagan TV, Witchcraft TV is going to be attacked from this particular front. This is, and that's just the beginning. They're going to start having phone calls. It's going to escalate. And what I think it is important is that all of these petty disputes within our community, we really need to have a solid front, because if it does happen, it could affect all of us.
Thank you, Harold. That is very, very true, very insightful.
Very true.
And I would point out that when I was a child, the city of Beirut was considered to be the Paris of the Middle East. It was a center of culture, a center of urbanity. But by the time I was a young man, it was a dust heap. They had battled themselves into utter ruin. And I don't think it's ever really recovered. And if you look at the Near East, so much of it has ended up going that way and continues to, mainly because this kind of radicalized element became so powerful. And, they're quite willing to reduce their countries to a heap of ash if they rule the heap of ash. And I think we'll find the Christian dominionists are exactly the same. And, we still are in a position, although not nearly as good a position as we were in 10 or 20 years ago, where we can organize and work against this, but we must do so. And again, we must not confuse it with being about one person or even one party, because they are present in both parties. And other parties that are less commonly thought of. It is a wide movement that we must take a stand against. And things like the uproar over the Paris opening ceremony are an example of ways in which they're pushing their agenda that may not be obvious. And we need to remember they're pushing everywhere they can. And we really need to hold our ground and push back where possible, or be prepared to lose our ground. And I believe with that, we have updates from Chris Copeland about the stories from Europe that she has been covering. We do not have video from Chris, but we have a written account, and I will read that for you. And there are two primary things that she has reported on. And the first one is that on June 19th of 2024, Greta Thunberg was arrested in Malmö, Sweden, for her involvement in the blockade of an oil terminal organized by the activist group Ta Tillbaka Framtiden, called in English Reclaim the Future. The protest aimed to disrupt fossil fuel operations as a stand against climate change. Thunberg and other activists were charged with disobeying police orders. She faced trial on July 24th of 2024 and was fined 1,500 kronor, which is approximately 112 pounds, plus an additional 1,000 kronor to the Swedish Fund for Victims of Crime. Thunberg remains steadfast in her climate advocacy, underscoring the critical need for urgent climate action. On June 19th, also, of 2024, and we reported on this on several fronts, Just Stop Oil activists Rajan Naidu, 73, and Niam Lynch, 21, sprayed orange powder paint on Stonehenge to protest fossil fuel extraction. Just Stop Oil has been linked to funding from an oil baroness. This action, coinciding with the summer solstice, drew condemnation from public figures, especially in the pagan community, and was described as ineffective vandalism of a sacred site by some, and a potential hate crime by others. Wiltshire police arrested Naidu and Lynch. And English Heritage, which manages the Stonehenge site, has since removed the powder, finding no visible damage to the ancient site, though they say that concerns remain about potential long-term impacts on the stones and lichens. And those are Chris's updates from stories that she has been covering. And, it is certainly interesting to just watch where the world is. And with the Stonehenge story, one of the things that I find it necessary to remark on is that although the orange powder paint does not appear to have harmed the stones themselves, although long-term damage is in question, my understanding is that had it rained, that would not have been the case. And I think that, protest is very important, and there are certainly occasions where I encourage it, but you also need to think about the effect of your protest, because sometimes you can damage the very thing you're trying to support by the way that you protest the thing that you're trying to protest against. And I think that sometimes people forget that.
I don't see how damaging what most of us pagans hold sacred is going to further anyone's interest, especially since most pagans support any form of environmentalism.
Well, that's one of the things I've always found very questionable about this entire story, is that the vast majority of pagans would support what this organization claims that it's advocating for. And so attacking one of our sacred sites seems self-destructive.
It does. They outraged people who would have supported their aims if they had approached the organizers and asked for a few minutes to speak.
And one of the things that's been pointed out, and Chris mentioned it also in her update, is that one of the people giving heavy backing to this is actually from a prominent oil family. And there are people who have some serious questions what they're really doing, and whether they're trying to discredit people who are protesting against oil development and the use of fossil fuels. And I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what all to say about it, but certainly this one incident seems very self-defeating to any opposition to fossil fuel.
It does indeed.
And speaking of protest, I think that our final story is on protest from a different corner. And with that, we'll turn the chair over to Mary.
Yes, and I am going to share some disturbing news from my home of Nashville, Tennessee. And this is from Tennessee Lookout. Although this has made the news, we have had 3 incidents recently where we have had neo-Nazi protesters marching through downtown Nashville, going through our entertainment district where our tourists come. We had some July 7th, a different group apparently on July 15th, and we had another group. This group, actually, the ones on July the 15th, attacked a lesbian mother and daughter. They made the little girl cry, and then the bartender where they had been dining came out and got into an altercation with the protesters. We then had another incident where, I'm trying to show up another one, just a moment, where we have a hate group that actually stopped and yelled racial slurs at a group of young men. And we're still not sharing, just a moment. Here we go. All right. They were hurling racial slurs at a group of young black men, or children really, aged 9 to 15, who were drumming downtown. They do this every weekend to raise money. And so the police helped the kids move along, but they didn't really do anything to stop the protesters. And we have had now a march on yesterday on the 27th to bring the community together. City and state legislatures are being called on to do something about the hate groups. We have also had Tennessee lawmakers. Let's see. There we go. Tennessee lawmakers denounce racism after neo-Nazis harass child musicians downtown. So we have had response from our lawmakers, from Justin Jones, which some of you will remember. He's one of the Tennessee Three who's had to run for re-election after his seat was stripped from him earlier this year. So they are trying to get more legislation pushed through. What is disturbing is 3 times now we have had marchers going through our streets, yelling "Sieg Heil" and worse things. They were basically holding an unlicensed march, and nothing was done to stop them. I took part in the Pride Parade earlier this year, and there were all kinds of rules we had to follow. It was planned out months ahead. As many of you know, I'm an organizer for Nashville Pagan Pride Day, held in a public park. We have been planning this for a year. We have a long list of rules to follow, and we have paid for the park, paid for security, paid for amplification, etc. And personally, I'm really offended that anyone can just march through the streets and spew this vile hatred and get away with it. It is very disturbing to me that this is happening in Nashville, where we are widely known as a blue dot in a red state. Nashville is overall a very welcoming cosmopolitan community. And I will be bringing updates on this.
I think it's important to look at this. Well, is what I think it is, a test to see what kind of reaction they're going to get.
It really is.
Yeah. They obviously believe they have political cover. And also, they obviously do. If they didn't, something would have been done. Because obviously this is not in compliance with the laws there. And yet nothing is happening. So they do have political cover for it. But this is part of what is so important about all this talk about Project 2025 and other things in dealing with that Christian nationalist movement, of which the Nazi movement is part, it's not only what happens legally, but what happens extra legally, and whether anything is done about it. To me, the question arises, if they'd physically assaulted those children, would anything have followed? And I'm sure
I
that question
don't
has
know.
arisen to them also. And, you know, I would personally hope that the citizens of Nashville would maybe stage some anti-Nazi marches in response to this, or otherwise show that this is not acceptable to them. Because I think if they don't, we're going to start seeing it in other places. U-Haul Nazis everywhere.
Actually, U-Haul, I cannot find the link to the story anymore, so it may have been taken down. But someone reached out to U-Haul for a statement, and U-Haul stated that they do not rent to organizations. They always rent to an individual. The contract always states that people can only ride in the cab, and you can only have riders for which there are seat belts. And I've certainly rented enough U-Hauls in my lifetime to tell you, you can normally get 2 or 3 people in the cab of a U-Haul. But there are not to be any people in the back of the vehicle while it's in motion. So U-Haul was actually asking if anyone had a picture of the license plates to send it to them.
Hopefully someone will. And we should probably explain that the Nazis are arriving for their marches in the back of U-Hauls.
They are. So if you witness Nazis arriving anywhere in the back of U-Hauls, get a picture of the license plate and send it to U-Haul and let them know.
And realistically, without that information, there's not much U-Haul can do about it, because they don't know what individual is renting these. But obviously, they're not concerned with U-Haul's rules if they're not concerned with the laws of the city.
Right.
But they have a lot. Sounds like there's more possibility they would be held accountable for breaking U-Haul's rules than apparently the actual law. And
At least
that's the thing.
U-Haul can refuse to rent to Joe Nazi anymore.
That's the thing that I think we must also emphasize. When we talk about things like Project 2025, we're talking about people wanting to put things into legislation, but also not necessarily doing them all legally either. They're looking for coverage for things beyond what they're actually admitting. And this is a perfect example. Now, Harold is in the chat room and has said, "I've lost connection. I'm real far out in the Sawtooth Mountains. Love and peace to all." Thank you, Harold. I think it was kind of
wonderful
obvious.
time, Harold.
Yeah. I think it was kind of obvious that the connection was rather iffy. And we want to thank Harold for joining us today at all, given that circumstance. Next month, we should have our full crew, and we'll be back with many more interesting stories. I'd love to say there will be no more interesting stories, but that is not the world we seem to be living in. I'm sure there'll be plenty of them. And we may have some updates to the ones that we're talking about today. And I think for me, the final thing that I would want to add is that, we're living in, as they used to joke about, very interesting times. And we need to be mindful that we are in interesting times and that we must not just assume that things are going to stay normal because years ago they were. One of the things you hear about again and again from people in Europe in the 1930s was that they were confident that nothing like what happened later was going to happen. They were certain their legal institutions would stand. They were certain that people would never lower themselves to the level of indecency that they did lower themselves to. We must not make that same mistake. We need to be mindful and vigilant of what is happening. Can we stop it? I don't know. But we certainly cannot simply turn a blind eye to it. One of my favorite novels, well, not novel, but one of my favorite books that I've had, because it was not a work of fiction, it's called The Mask of the Swastika. And it was a series of essays by a Jewish gentleman who had grown up in Germany. He was German Jewish, had left Germany, obviously, during the Third Reich, and went back after the end of World War II to talk to people his family had known before the war and find out their take on what all had happened. And it's a fascinating series of interviews with everyone from the family maid, who went on to be a prominent Nazi, to the Baroness, who was a family friend who ended up in a concentration camp, to lots of other ordinary German people. One of the comments in that book from the Baroness, who ended up in the concentration camp, that she'd been going all over Germany before the election of Adolf Hitler, telling people, you have to be mindful of this. You have to realize that this isn't just rhetoric. These people have told us who they are. And she said that again and again, people said, oh no, that could never happen here. We're not worried. We don't believe such a thing. And they were wrong. I know there are people out there saying, you're making too much of this. This is just a bunch of extremists. But again, if we look at Europe in the 1930s, if we look at the Near East today, extremists can become the dominant power. And these extremists are awfully close to doing it. And we just have to look at what follows to know where it's going to lead. And that's nowhere good. So to me, half of the reason that I'm doing many of the things I'm doing now is to try to wake people up to that danger. And I hope as you listen to these stories, you do notice that this, in fact, is happening. And with that, I want to thank you, Mary, for joining us. I want to thank you, Harold, for joining us. And I want to thank you, Chris, for sending in your updates. And I want to thank everyone for watching. And we'll be back again next month, again with our full component, and more, hopefully, very interesting stories for you. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, may you blessed be.